Hi, I'm David Samson from Nothing Personal with David Samson. You are watching The Walk-Off with Scott and Adam.
Thrilled to be joined by today's guest, David Samson of the Nothing Personal with David Samson podcast. For those of you who don't know, and of course everybody seeing this already does, David was president of the Montreal Expos from 1999 to 2002, and then for the Miami Marlins for 2002 to 2017. Beyond that, he was also, and I can't let this slide, a contestant on Survivor. So we have a lot of Survivor fans in our community who are excited to talk Survivor. So we're going to talk baseball here in a second, but before we do, I would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge your time on Survivor. So 2014, while you were still the president of the Miami Marlins, you were on season 28 of Survivor. So how cool was that? And one question here. So I'm positive that you have your World Series ring from 2003. But do you have your torch from 2014?
Indeed I do. Awesome. I actually had to buy my torch. At the end of every season, they take the props and they sell them to raise money for charity. And so it's an auction. And so not only do I have my torch, I also have the stool I sat on at tribal council, the one tribal council I was on before getting voted off. I also have the pen that was used by everyone that season to write names at tribal council to vote people off. And I have the bucket that was used for our rice that Jatia famously poured out in the fire, but I bought that as well. So I have a bunch of props from the season. It was an amazing experience. The first time I saw Survivor was at Olympic Stadium in Montreal. It was a debut in May of 2000, as I recall. And I was with Larry Beinfest, who was our assistant general manager, who eventually became the president of baseball operations, the World Series winning president of baseball operations with the Marlins 3 years later. But at that point, he was the assistant GM to Jim Beattie, former Yankee World Series winner, who was the GM in Montreal. So this show was coming on, and it looked fascinating to us. So we had our video guy, who also happened to be our team trainer back then, and traveling secretary. That was a while ago when instead of one job for one person, it was 3 jobs for one person. We had them tape on a VCR, a VHS tape, every episode, because there'd be games going on during Survivor. It was on at 8 o'clock on Thursdays back then. Mm-hmm. And we would watch it in the suite where there was a VCR player, VHS player. And I said, I want to be on this show. And it took, I'd say, 12 years for me to figure out, well, this could be a good time, because the new ballpark was open in Florida. And I said, I'm going to try. So I made a video, sent in the video, applied online, and I got a call the next day from production at Survivor saying, hey, if this is you and you can really do it, we'd love you to fly to California for a few days, but first you're going to need a note from mommy. And I said, what do you mean? They said, you're the president of a team. You're not coming on this show unless the commissioner of baseball and your owner says it's okay. And so I got permission, and I went to California where I had physicals and saw doctors and therapists and took an IQ test and did all sorts of prep, met with Jeff Probst and Mark Burnett. And 6 months later, I was on a plane to Manila, connecting to Cagayan, which is in the Luzon province of Philippines. And about 10 days later, I was SOL, voted out first. First boot. There's only 40 of us in the world, so I wear it with a badge of honor.
There you go. That's awesome. All right. Well, I do want to say this because I've been watching Survivor with my daughter since she was first born. That was our midnight feedings kind of ritual. We'd turn on an episode, feed, burp, and off to bed. So I just wanted to say this because she's going to kill me for doing this, but I got to embarrass her a little bit. So my daughter, who's 10, instead of saying no offense, she says nothing personal with David Samson. So, and it's caught on at her school. So none of the other kids have heard your show, but she listens to it with me on the drive to school every day. And it's caught on. So if you take nothing else from this conversation today, enjoy the fact that there is a small group of 10-year-olds in Edmonton, Alberta, who are on the playground saying nothing personal with David Samson.
I love it. I think the funny part about the show is when you first start a show And you can feel this, right? Because you're starting something and you have no listeners, and then you get one listener, and you do a show every day, which I do, and I pretend, whether it's one listener or as big as it is with tens and 20s of thousands of people, every day, I pretend that there's still only one listener, and I talk into the camera. And I love when people come up to me on the street or talk to me at various places and talk about the show, talk about Survivor, talk about baseball, but they're listening to Nothing Personal because for whatever reason, there's a niche that's been created with this show, and it's grown in a way I never could have anticipated because there's no other former executive who's willing to talk the way I do because they're all trying to get back into baseball or back into sports. And I did it for 18 years. I don't want to get back, so I'm willing to talk the truth and sort of peel back the layers. And I think that's the attraction, is that people may not want to always hear what I have to say, but deep down they understand, wow, this guy is speaking to power and to truth. And it doesn't make me popular, but it keeps people interested.
Well, I can definitely attest to that. You're one of my favorite podcasts to listen to or watch through the lockout, especially. Some great insight through all the ups and downs of that whole nightmare of a process. But yeah, really enjoy all your insight onto contract negotiation and what goes into trades and everything like that. So keep doing what you're doing. You're doing great. Love it. I do have one question about the podcast, though. I've been listening for a couple of years now, and most of the recurring, I don't want to say bits, but most of the recurring things that happen in your show, you explain almost daily, right? Like so you want to talk to Samson. Obviously, you explain that every time. One thing that you don't explain is when you do stumble through words and then you get Coca to cut that out, and then you'll repeat 3 numbers, and they're different numbers, it feels like, every time. You'll go 4, 13, 69, and then you start over. You leave it in even though it feels like you're asking him to cut it out. So I love that you leave it in, for one. But what do those 3 numbers mean?
So let me get back to, it's 45 minutes every day, and one of the things that Coca, who's the producer, a guy named Matthew Coca, who people thought wasn't real, but he's real, and he is the perfect partner for me. He is a millennial. He disagrees with everything I say. He doesn't genuflect in my general direction ever. We meet pre-show and post-show, and he will help me improve, and he helps me understand what people want to hear and what they want to talk about. So it's critical to have a producer and a partner who's not like you. And so many people in this world only surround themselves with people who are just like them. So the term for that is an echo chamber. And the problem with that is you're not really adding value to the listener. You're just getting a bunch of confirmation bias. And I never want that. I want to be challenged. And so one of the things that was important to me is that people know that I'm not perfect in any way. I made a ton of mistakes as president of a team. I've made a ton of mistakes as a father. Ton of mistakes in everything I've ever done, and all of my success is based on my failures. And when you record a show every day, you're going to make mistakes. And so many people run from their mistakes. The reason I do a wait to see every day, and that's sort of my hashtag, is I'm going to say something, in my opinion, is going to happen in the future, but I'm going to revisit it. And so many people on the air these days, when they're wrong, they just ignore it and press forward as though they were never wrong. But I revisit things when I'm wrong. So I took that to a more micro level. When I make a mistake on the show and I record it straight through, I do not have a prompter. I have an outline of topics, but it's all off the top of my head. So the detours that happen during the show are real. They just are things that pop into my head. And today's show, I'm not sure what day this is being released, but I did a show recently, if this is released after today, but it was actually today, where I just could not get a thought out that was in my head. And I kept saying it wrong. But instead of editing it, which so many people do, I leave it all in for people to hear so they can hear what it's like to do a show and what it's like to not be perfect and what it's like to make mistakes. And you're supposed to count yourself in, and you guys did it when you started this show. Just like when you're on the air, I'm an analyst for CBS, and they always say, mic check, count yourself in, and everyone says, mic check, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I always found that boring. So my mic check has always been, my entire career actually, starting in 1999, has always been 867-5309. Which has the same effect as a mic check because the numbers don't matter, and it just makes me smile because of what a great set of numbers, that is. So for me, when I'm making a mistake with Coca and I pretend that we're going to wipe it out and edit it, even though we never do, I'll say, Coca, let's start again, 4-6-69 or 3-10-9. I just come up with numbers. For whatever reason, 69 is always in my head, or 6 or 5. It's just the numbers that occurred to me at that time. There is no rhyme or reason to it whatsoever.
All right. Well, appreciate the peek behind the curtain there. Very fun. All right. So let's now start with your time in Montreal. So in 1999, you took over as the president. So let's start with that. You were the president of the Montreal Expos. Now,
executive vice president, actually.
Sorry.
Now, there was no one above me but the owner. But when the owner, Jeffrey Loria, who was my stepfather at the time, and we were coming in as a family to get this team, and he wanted me to help him run the team, but the existing Canadian partners did not want me to get the title of president because they wanted a French Canadian to be president, and I was a New Yorker, a Jewish New Yorker. And so they said as part of the deal, he can only be called executive vice president. And I said to Jeffrey at the time, I said, I don't care what my title is. I just care that we run a good team and we do our best to make things work. So that was my title, EVP.
That description of Montreal sports just sums up everything about Montreal sports. I mean, as a Montreal Canadiens hockey fan and all the French-speaking coaches that demanded, and anyway, I could go off the rails with that, but that's hilariously petty. So
it would shock you. One of the things that is tough about Montreal is that when I was there for those 2.5 years and 2 baseball seasons, people cared far more about making sure that every memo was sent in 2 languages.
Right.
Making sure that people were understanding what separatism was and wanting me to understand the politics of Quebec and the province and their problems with the rest of Canada and all the other things that were going on. And I just said, I don't care about any of this stuff. I'm trying to actually find a way to save a sinking ship. And make no mistake, one of the biggest misconceptions when I started in December of '99, I mean, there were basically, picture the game Battleship. Have you ever heard of that game?
Of course.
So in Battleship, you say like B4, hit. A7, miss. It's like bingo, and you have to sink a battleship, and a battleship can have 3 holes in it or 4 holes or 5 holes.
Right.
Montreal was a 5-hole battleship. 4 pegs were already in it, and there were not many guesses left on the board. So we were a sinking ship, that team, and it had been sinking since 1994 and the strike. And so we took over, and we had been told going in that they really wanted a French Canadian to buy the team from Claude Brochu. They wanted one of the limited partners to take over the general partnership, and not one of them. And these are all the titans of industry in Montreal. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about the biggest, richest people in Montreal wanted no part of the Expos because they knew it was failing, and they were only too happy to blame an Anglo like me.
Right.
And so that's really how it happened.
Fair enough. Well, I appreciate the explanation into your title role there. Maybe you could explain for us, like in Toronto, so we have Shapiro and Atkins as our president and GM, doing a great job with the Blue Jays right now, by the way. But we as a fan base usually refer to them almost as a single entity between the president and the GM. So could you just clarify for all of Blue Jays fans, what is the difference in those 2 roles? Is there a hierarchy of who is above the other and what their general responsibilities would be?
So we started with title inflation with Larry Beinfest, who was the GM, and Michael Hill was our assistant GM, and people were calling on Michael and wanted him to leave Florida, and we didn't want to lose him. And so we said, well, we know how to keep you. We're going to name you GM of the Marlins. But we still wanted Larry to run the baseball operations, so we said we got to promote and change Larry's title. So we made Larry Beinfest president of baseball operations, made Mike Hill general manager, but it really was Larry Beinfest was the general manager and Mike Hill was the assistant general manager. So their jobs didn't change, just their titles did. And what you've seen since then is most teams, if not all, have a president of baseball operations and a GM. And in every case, the GM reports to the president of baseball operations. The job of the president of baseball operations is to run the entire silo of baseball. And it is much more than just making trades and playing fantasy baseball. It is a huge business. It's the biggest business within your company. You've got the minor leagues, you've got scouting, you've got player development, you've got the major league team, you've got coaches. I mean, you just have all sorts of people reporting to you, an analytics department, professional scouting, amateur scouting. So the president of baseball operations is in charge of all of that. The GM works for the president of baseball operations and is counted on to do that which the president wants him or her to do. In Toronto, it is the same thing. Now, some would argue that Mark Shapiro has some business responsibilities. In our team, the president of baseball operations reported to me, the president. So I was the president of the entire team. I had the CFO report to me. I had the senior VP of marketing. I had the senior VP of sales, the president of baseball operations, the senior VP of communications. They all reported to me. So the president of baseball operations reports to the president. The president runs the entire organization. The president of baseball ops runs the baseball side, and the GM works for the president. There is a possibility that Mark Shapiro does have things that he does on the business side. I have no information whether or not sales, marketing, and finance report to him, because if they do, then his title should not be president of baseball operations. It should be president. So I'd have to check to see what his current title is. But if it's president of baseball ops, then finance and marketing and sales do not report to him.
Okay. Very good. Thank you for that.
Out of curiosity, if I could just step in real quick here, is with so much on the president's plate these days, is that one of the reasons why baseball in general has become so much more collaborative when you're talking about the front offices? Because it seems like everyone has a finger in almost every pie when it comes to a front office these days.
So it's funny. People ask me all the time, what was your main job as president of the team? And the truth is, my main job, I was a referee. So I'd have people from the marketing department and the baseball department come to my office and say, hey, we need players to make these appearances and sign balls. The baseball department says we don't want players doing anything within 4 hours of a game. Or we've got the marketing department that says, hey, we're in charge of getting more sales, but we need better salespeople. So I had people in my office all day long, and I'm trying to manage them. So you actually, the higher you are in a hierarchy of a big company, the less you actually do in terms of boots on the ground, but the more decisions you have to make that are macro. There's sort of macroeconomic decisions. So I'm in charge of the budget, but I work with the CFO on that. I'm in charge of, at the end of the day, where we are going as a team on the field, but I've got a GM and a baseball department who are going to choose players. I'm not going to choose who we're going to sign to minor league deals. I'm going to let the baseball department do it. But if there's a international free agent above, my rule was above $250,000, I want to know about it. If it's below $250,000, you know your budget. Get good players. We'll evaluate you on how successful they are. But if you're taking up $250,000 or more, I need to know the name. I need to know who it is. Same with the marketing side. If you're going to spend money, your budget for advertising, spend your budget. But if you're going to put extra money into a campaign, I need to know about it. I want to approve it. So it was very much a collaboration because you've got to trust the people you work with and you've got to let them do their jobs. And so many people micromanage. And I never did that because A, I didn't want to. It's exhausting. But B, what's the use of having so many people work for you if they don't get to do their job? So I always wanted to hire the best people. So there were two rules I had about hiring. I wanted people who knew how to do their job, and I wanted people who wanted my job. That was very important to me, that everyone I hired wanted to be the president of the team, and I was never scared of that. I was never worried about a coup. I always wanted people who were strong, and I was always okay with people leaving the organization to join other organizations, to move on if their talents dictated or if they wanted a higher position, but it wasn't going to happen with the Marlins or the Expos. So that's pretty much, I would say, how it works.
Very cool. All right, so let's now pivot to baseball in specific. The Guerrero family. Obviously, you're familiar with Vlad Sr. from his time with the Expos and your time with the Expos. We could probably spend 25 minutes going over how wonderful of a player and how wonderful of a guy he was. But let's just go right to Vlad Jr. Sorry. So in 2017, the Miami Marlins, with you as the president, hosted the All-Star Game. And Vlad Jr., played in the Futures game that year. I believe Bo Bichette did as well, actually. Did you cross paths with Vlad Jr., and what was that like?
He was in the visiting clubhouse. I went to visit him, and I had not seen him since he was a kid. So I had known him in Montreal, and it was I can't describe it, right? You meet someone, and you always say, oh, that person could be a model, or oh, that person's going to be a professional athlete. You just suspect it, and 99 out of 100 times it doesn't work out. But with Vladimir Guerrero Jr., to me, there was just no way he wasn't going to be a major leaguer. He was that good as a baby, as a child, as a toddler. I'm talking about taking bats and hitting balls. He was doing it outside the clubhouse every day. He was there. And I went in to see him, and I introduced myself. And I had seen Vladimir Sr. throughout the years, and he and I have remained. I'll know him forever, and he knows me forever. And I went and introduced myself, and I said, hey, I just wanted to say hello. I'm David Samson. I ran the Expos. I worked with your dad for a couple of years, and I just want to wish you good luck. And he had this sort of look on his face that was half confidence and 1/4 surprise and 1/4 indifference, right? The 1/4 indifference was like, who are you and why are you bothering me? The 1/4 surprise was, wow, like you know my dad? Like that's sort of cool. Mm-hmm. And so it was really good to see him, and I love following his career. And as a matter of fact, on tomorrow's Nothing Personal, again, I don't know when you're releasing this, I'm going through my predictions for awards, and I am choosing Vladimir Guerrero to win the MVP in the American League this year.
Hey, love to hear that. No, that won't ruffle too many Jays fans' feathers, that's for sure.
Well, I'm actually picking, I mean, if I'll do a surprise here, because it'll come out tomorrow. The Blue Jays are going to win the AL pennant. I'm so proud of where the Blue Jays, of what they've done. They're so good. And I'm thinking back to their 92 and 93 teams, and I'm looking for any weakness in their team. Obviously, you have to perform. And winning the offseason doesn't matter. Getting off to a quick start in April doesn't matter. You have to prove it over a 6-month period, over the slog that is 162 games. But what I see in them is the hunger and also the talent. And when you combine those two things, wow, you can win yourself a ring.
Well, you know all about that. So let's take a step back now from the ball field, but let's keep Vlad Jr. in focus. A few weeks ago, news came out that Juan Soto had turned down a big contract extension from the Nationals. Obviously, you know all about that. I loved your breakdown of that contract extension and how much new money was getting added to it versus what he was already projected to get through arbitration anyways. So I loved your breakdown of that. Could we do something similar here quickly with Vlad Jr.? And just maybe let's even start with, what's the starting point for negotiations with Vlad that even gets him to the table?
So this is a problem, and I don't want to upset anyone of your fan base or your listeners, but I give it to you straight.
Yep.
I'm not giving Vladimir Guerrero Jr. a long-term deal because I don't want to take the risk that he'll become satisfied. And it's not that I am worried about his competitive nature at all. I worry a little bit about his body, and I've been very open about that. Mm-hmm. And as players age, if they don't take care of themselves properly, they can get too big or too hurt or too slow. Their back can slow down. They become DHs, and all of a sudden they don't have the type of production that you expect. And there are some players who, when they sign long-term deals, sort of just get happy in that way. But when they don't have long-term deals, they are incredibly motivated. And I always like players to be motivated, but I've also been stung by long-term deals that just have not worked out. But I love the concept of players playing year to year. But as an owner and a fan base, it's incredibly difficult. And we had to give in to the owner and to the fan base and to our history when we signed Giancarlo Stanton to that 13-year deal. Because we didn't want to be the team that always, quote, is the farm system to other teams. We didn't want to be the team that has all these great players, and boy, if we had great players, and watch them go elsewhere. So we knew we had to make Giancarlo Stanton an offer back in 2000 and whatever year it was, 15, 16, I can't remember anymore. All the years sort of melt together. And we had to make him an offer, and it went very simply, where I said to Giancarlo in California, I said, I need a number here that you're not going to say no to, no matter how badly you don't want to be a Marlin. And I said, I'm going to make you an offer that I promise you'll say yes to. And he said, I don't think so. And I said, watch this. I said, how do you feel about 325 over 13? And he went into stunned silence because he knew he was coming off getting hit in the face by pitch. He knew that he was going to take that deal and that we had hit the number. So there's a number for everyone. But the numbers have moved in such a way that Vladimir Guerrero is going to say to Mark Shapiro, hey, there's a number that I'll sign for, but I'm setting a record. Mm-hmm. I'm getting above Trout. And I'm getting above Trout in terms of the absolute notional value, and I'm going to get above Correa in terms of position players. So I'm going to need $36 million a year, and you're going to have to give me 10 years at a minimum 360, but I think it's going to be 4 to 450. And if I'm the Blue Jays, I'm not doing it. And the reason I'm not doing it is that as much as it feels good when you do it, it feels badly when it doesn't work out and you've got to trade the player and pay half his salary to get him traded. I bring your attention to the San Diego Padres, who signed 2 long-term deals where the entire audience was so happy. Eric Hosmer, oh my God, we signed the World Series champion. Meanwhile, they can't wait to trade him. They can't find a team to take him. Mm-hmm. Will Myers, oh, this is the greatest ownership group ever. We signed this guy. They would trade him tomorrow for a bag of balls. Then they continued and signed Manny Machado to a 10-year, $30 million per year deal. And the Padres don't want to trade him now because we're still too early. But come 4 years from now, when Manny Machado is still making $30 million and the Padres realize that they can't keep a payroll where the Dodgers are, the Padres are going to have a problem. So how do you avoid that? Well, you try to win a World Series. And then you say, you know what, if we win a World Series, it's okay if he stinks the last few years, which is what Artie Moreno did when he signed Albert Pujols, the owner of the Angels. Right. When he signed Pujols in 12, he said he's going to be terrible the last 3 years of this 10-year deal. But if we win a World Series or 2 in the first 7 years, it's the greatest contract I ever signed. And if you talk to Artie Moreno now, and he were honest with you, he would tell you that the Albert Pujols deal was the worst contract he ever did because they didn't win anything. And he had to eat money at the end. So what feels so good, and here's the problem when you run a team and you're on social media and you get the accolades, you get written up in articles that your PR people give to you. You won the offseason. You're the hero. Your fans love you. People are buying tickets. Everyone's so happy. And then in June, you're 10 games below 500. That's the concern that you have with these type of long-term deals with superstars who are expecting not to give you a deal, but to actually get a premium to sign long-term. It didn't used to be that way. It used to be long-term you could get a discount because it's guaranteed. Now these players want a premium, and Vladimir's going to want a premium.
Well, let's look, I guess, at Bo Bichette then, and include him in the conversation. Mm-hmm. So a couple years ago, before, just as these two were making their debut, or just about to make their debut in the MLB, fans were already calling for a Albies, Acuna Jr. type, like, let's just pay him now, let's get the discount, we'll take a little bit of a risk, but let's just lock him up. Obviously, as the sons of major league millionaires themselves, Bo and Vlad were never going to be in the same position to be exploited that way, and rather bet on themselves and their ceilings.
That's a tough word. Hold on.
Hold
on.
All right.
Loaded word.
It's a strong word. Yeah.
All right. Stop me there. That's good.
I'm going to stop you there because when you say exploited, so that means that Acuna and Albies were forced, right? The Braves sat them down and said, if you don't sign this, we're never going to make you another deal, and we're going to sit you on the bench and never play you. And by the way, we're going to underpay you so badly that you're going to be the
all right.
stock. Come on.
You're right. Let's backtrack on that word then, and I'll take that back from the sentence. Thank you for catching me there. That was a little more malicious than maybe how I intended it in my head, so that's why we love you, David. But so obviously the two of them didn't sign any sort of a deal like that. with the pedigree that they had, that was a big factor.
Well, with the money, right? I mean, let's face it. You said it, and I think it's okay to say. Bo Bichette and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. do not need money the way Albies and Acuna did. That money that was offered by the Braves, if Albies or Acuna get hurt, their career ends. They have generational wealth,
of course,
that did not exist. It is irresponsible not to sign that deal if you're Albies and Acuna. Did they sign it at a discount? You bet your ass they did, because they were getting guaranteed money. And the number of players who sign those deals as kids, the number of times those don't work out is greater than the number of times they end up being team friendly.
Of course. So with that in mind now, when it comes to looking at a long-term deal for either Bo or Vlad, let's say that the Blue Jays do decide that they want to lock both guys up long-term, does the fact that they have major league fathers behind them, neither of whom, Dante nor Vlad Sr., have a World Series ring, do you think that that might work in our favor for a little bit of a hometown discount? Like, do you think there's any chance that they say, you know what, $300 million is plenty? Because my dad would have given anything to get that World Series ring, and he never did. Or am I being way too romantic about this?
Yeah, so let me give you a piece of news from running a team for 18 years.
Sure.
The concept hometown discount does not exist.
Well, we just saw it in Cleveland with Jose Ramirez.
I was just going to say, can we talk?
You think that's a hometown discount, his contract?
I thought it was a pretty good deal for Cleveland.
Okay, I actually have a listener question right here that fits into this perfectly.
Okay.
It's from Bernadette out of Regina, Saskatchewan, and she says, "Hey, David, so cool you're on the show. I listen to your podcast regularly. Here's the meat of it, though.
Thank you.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Jose Ramirez extension. I know Marcus Semien was a free agent, which is always going to maximize a player's contract, but it still feels like Jose left money on the table and took a discount to stay in Cleveland. What's your take on that?"
So I have a question. Was Jose Ramirez going to be a free agent at the end of this year?
No.
Was he going to be a free agent at the end of next year?
No.
Okay. So just to be clear, let's just pretend that the next 2 years are only okay, or that he gets hurt. Just maybe let's pretend it happens. And I go up to a player and say, you're off the hook now. Not only do you have the 2 years in front of you, but I'm extending you another 4, and I'm giving you $100 million, $25 million for those 4 years, and you may stink. You may be amazing. You may be worth $35 million a year, so you may be leaving $40 million off the table, but you may be worth $6 million a year. Do you know for sure today? I want to know, Regina or anybody, are you able to evaluate all of these people on all these shows telling you about Jose Ramirez's contract? They're all full of it. You can't evaluate this contract today. You can't. You need to wait years to evaluate it.
That's such a great point. I love that, actually.
That's why we love you, David. That's absolutely why we love you. So, okay, let's take this last question here, and then we'll get to last couple listener questions here. You mentioned on this morning's podcast, by the way, when you stumbled, was that the first ever F word that I heard on your show? I know it got bleeped out, but was that the first time that you dropped an F-bomb? Because that was a pretty long beep.
I was frustrated, right? Because I was trying to make a point about young players, and it was a point that was important to me to communicate, that all of the pundits who were saying the CBA is working, everything's great, young players being called up. I was trying to explain that actually that's not the case, and again, we have to wait till the end of the year to see how things are going, and frankly, you have to wait 2 to 3 years to see how this CBA is really working. And I was trying to explain Hunter Green versus Julio Rodriguez, and I was trying to relay a conversation I had with Mike Hill, and I couldn't do it right. And in my brain, I was saying it right. And one of the things about me that I've always been able to do is that my brain is always ahead of my mouth. And that makes it easy for me to give speeches. It makes it easy for me to give live interviews, because in my head, I'm thinking what I'm going to say before it comes out of my mouth. But for whatever reason this morning, I was tired, I was grumpy, whatever the case may be. My mouth was ahead of my brain, and it caused me to make mistakes. And that's what happened. So I was pissed.
Fair enough. All right. One last thing here, and then we'll get to the listener questions for real. I know we got a lot to get to. So the pitch comm you talked about this morning, the little wristband with the catchers. It's a weird piece of technology. I know all the old school romantic baseball fans think it's stupid. Me personally, I kind of think it's dumb, but if it speeds up the game, it's good. So I want to do a crystal ball moment with you, David. If we look into the future, I see a future where catchers don't call the game at all anymore, and it's entirely shifted to the analytics department. And instead, the catcher position becomes more of one for freak athletes with some dynamite in their bat. Am I wrong here, or does that feel inevitable?
Listen, even 5 years ago, we'd be watching games, and we would let our catchers call games. There were certain catchers we had where we had to call the game, but only one or two in my whole career. So you go over a game plan before a series, and then there's an offensive meeting and a defensive meeting, pitchers meeting, position players meeting. Then before every game, in the office of the coaches, you have the starting pitcher and the starting catcher meeting with the coaching staff, with the analytics department, and they're going over the game plan. Here's how we're attacking this hitter in this situation, et cetera, et cetera. And then the catcher and pitcher go, and the catcher calls the game. The natural next step is, hey, we don't need to have the meeting. Just, you're going to have an earpiece. We'll tell you what to throw every time. It's going to take 2 seconds. You're going to know what's being thrown. The pitcher's going to know because he's going to have it in his ear. And that's going to be quick, and it's going to be right, and we're never going to have an opportunity for misunderstanding. And meanwhile, the people calling the game will be in front of 10 monitors. They'll have all of their computers up, and it will lead to an efficiency that does not exist right now. Do I think that that's the future? I would be willing to tell you that's the present.
Okay.
Analytics departments are so involved in a micro way. I've used that word twice now, but it has become very, very robotic. And the reason why you've got the push and pull between old school and new school, or traditionalists and new school, is that one of the things that we would look for in a manager or in a general manager or in players is their baseball IQ. Baseball IQ is looking at a situation and evaluating the situation as it exists at that moment. The way baseball is today, baseball IQ doesn't matter, right? Look back, I'll bring you this example. Kevin Cash takes out Blake Snell in Game 6 of a World Series against the Dodgers. Mm-hmm. Or it could have been, I think it was the Dodgers. And Blake Snell was pitching great for the Rays at the time, but he had gone through the lineup twice, and the analytics department had been very clear. Blake Snell will not go through the lineup 3 times. It doesn't matter if he's throwing a no-hitter. It does not matter. And Kevin Cash was not able to manage with his eyes. He was managing with his info. And for me, if all of the eyes are taken out of the equation, I believe that it will not lead to perfection. It will lead to a level of robotic that is not good for the game. So I would like to see a mix of analytics and eyes.
Do you think when the pendulum swings that far to one side that we may see some teams go back to a more baseball IQ type of way of running a team?
I love that. So remember when the shift first started and there were only 1 or 2 teams doing the shift and they were getting a huge advantage, and then it's a copycat league. So then all of a sudden 5 or 6 teams, and then 10 teams, and then 14 teams, 20 teams, and then all of a sudden 30 teams are doing the shift. Everyone's got the same information. Guess what? The shift is no longer an advantage because everybody's doing it. So the key is to do something before people do it, to be the first or the second. That's called the early adapter rule, which goes for technology like your phone. Some people don't like being the early adapters. They want to wait to see. There's 2 types of people, right? When the Apple iPhone update comes out, there's some people who update their phone immediately, and there's some people who have the red 1 on their settings for like a month because they want to wait for the bugs to come out and they want to wait to see what happens to their phone. I understand that. And in baseball, being an early adopter is really good because if there is an advantage to be had, that's the time to have it. So I think that shifts, when they're going to be outlawed, but it's not going to change the game really because everyone's shifting now, then no one will be shifting, so there won't be any incremental advantage for anybody.
Very good. All right, well, we got time for maybe 1 or 2 listener questions here. Scott, do you want to jump in right away?
Yeah, let's get into it here, see how many we can get out. Okay, David. So this one is a fun one, actually. It's from Uncle Jer, so Adam's brother. Little nepotism here to get his question in under the wire. He says, hey, David, what gear, jerseys, hats, batting gloves, helmet, bat, etc., and I've always wanted to know this, does the team own, and what does the player own, and which items are single-game use versus season-long use?
So the team owns all of the bats, all of the balls, all of the jerseys. The players have their own gloves that are given to them by Rawlings, let's say, or Wilson, whoever it is. And players, there are players who use the same glove their whole career. There are players who have several different gloves. Players tend to wear shoes, which they own. During a season, they'll go through 80 pairs of shoes. You wear them once every 2 games, let's say. Not like the NBA where they wear a different pair every day. There are players who get accustomed to their spikes and will wear them for 4 days, let's say. Or they've got rubber spikes, they've got metal spikes, they've got no spikes, turf shoes, etc. And jerseys are completely the possession of the team, and we will continue to give players the same jersey. They get washed after every game. When they have a hole in them from sliding, we'll sew them up until it becomes, it's like a regular piece of clothing, right? You're going to keep using it until it's so awful that you have to replace it.
All right, very cool. Yeah, one more quick one, Scott, and we'll
let's get one in here, and we'll let you go. Absolutely. Thanks again, David. Really appreciate your time. So this one is from Derek in Panama from our Discord, and he asks, hey, David, do you feel Montreal should or even could be given a franchise again? What needs to be done to make baseball sustainable in Montreal, if it's even possible?
Well, there has to be some sort of way to lock in any currency fluctuation. Because in Montreal, and it's an issue in Toronto as well, your revenue is in Canadian dollars and your expenses are in American dollars. And that is a huge disadvantage for Canadian teams. In Montreal, they have to find a way to get a public-private partnership to build a retractable roof, air-conditioned stadium. And on top of that, they need to find a way to get a TV deal that's commensurate with teams they're competing with within baseball. And those are things that we were just unable to do. Those are things that historically have been unable to happen in Montreal. I'm not going to tell you that you have to guarantee 30,000 people a game or 20,000 season ticket holders. It's far more the big ticket items, the ballpark and the TV deal. So the best thing Montreal could do is to find one of the wealthy local people who is willing to find a way to work with the politicians to get a stadium financed, and then find a way to get a TV deal, approach baseball and say, hey, when you expand, just know we're ready. Here's what we have in place. Financing for a ballpark and a TV deal ready to be executed, and we've got the money to pay the expansion fee, and we've got the money right now to run an organization, and we've got diversity within our ownership group. This is our package. Please choose us. I think that's the best chance Montreal has.
Amazing.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you so much again for your time today, David.
You got one more question.
All right.
Yeah, okay.
The nepotism one was a bonus. Believe me, I'm all in favor of nepotism, so I was not going to let that pass. But let's give one more to somebody.
All right, your call.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much. We're going to go with Drinker of Beer from our Discord, and he asks, you're the second of 3 MLB-related stars on Survivor. Just curious if you can name the other 2.
John Rocker and Jeff Kent.
Hey, you got it.
Nails it.
Didn't
There
even
we
have to
go.
think about it.
One more. That was way too.
You're like, that's
By the
way
way,
too soon.
The fact that those guys lasted longer than I did on the island, and so did Jimmy Johnson, I cannot tell you how annoyed I am. Although I still think about it. It's been, God, we filmed it in summer of 13, so this summer it's 9 years. I still think about it every day. Maybe it's because I look at the memorabilia every day, but I think about it because I keep wondering, much like baseball games, what could we have done differently? What move could I have made? But it's a nightmare. Damn, Jeff Kent, are you serious? Nobody liked him in the game. Just like me, and I'm voted off first. John Rocker?
Okay. Matt Andrew says in Discord here, he asks, after being president of 2 Major League Baseball teams and winning a World Series with the Marlins, what do you think the biggest element it takes from the front office to turn your team franchise into a World Series contender?
to find the right balance between meddling and allowing people to do their jobs with an amazing sprinkling of luck and good fortune, and then the recognition that you will spend the rest of your career chasing Amy, trying to get that feeling again.
Awesome. Okay, well, David, we appreciate it. We appreciate the couple extra minutes for those last few questions at the end. Good luck with your show and all your future endeavors. We had a blast talking with you. So, again, nothing personal with David Samson. Anybody that's not subscribed already, go check out David's show. Subscribe. Follow along. It's one of the best baseball and probably sports shows going. So, enjoy.
Agreed.
Thanks again,
yeah,
David.
thanks, David. Really
Thank
really
you.
enjoyed
Have
this.
a great day.